The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal floors of the Galactic Council building on Nexus Prime. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zalani Empire walked through the corridors, his 6 legs clicking against the polished surface. In his 4 hands, he carried data pads filled with reports from across the galaxy. The council chambers buzzed with the usual noise. Representatives from dozens of species argued about trade routes, mining rights, and border disputes. The Krex Dominion delegates growled at the ethereal collective ambassadors. The Merchant Republic traders whispered about new profit opportunities. Everything seemed normal. Kethvar settled into his seat and began reading through the daily reports. Most were boring routine matters, pirates attacking cargo ships in the Outer Rim, the usual complaints about tariffs from the Trade Federation, a minor territorial dispute between 2 small colonies. Then he saw it, a single line buried in the middle of page 47, human colonies beginning systematic withdrawal from contested sectors. He blinked his large eyes and read it again. Humans? The quiet species that had joined the galactic community 200 years ago? What were they withdrawing from? Kethvar had met humans before. They were polite enough, but nothing special. Not strong fighters like the Krex. Not brilliant scientists like the Ethereals. Not clever traders like the Merchant Republics. They were just there. Always willing to help with small problems. Always ready to mediate disputes. Never asking for much in return. He pulled up more detailed files on his datapad. The information was sparse, but clear. Humans had announced something called the Great Reclamation Project 6 months ago. They said they wanted to bring all their people closer to their home systems. Something about resource optimization and cultural preservation. The door to the chambers opened with a soft hiss. Ambassador Sarah Martinez of Earth entered. She was a middle-aged woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She always dressed simply compared to the elaborate robes and jewels worn by other species. "Good morning, Ambassador Kethvar," she said with a smile as she took her seat nearby. "Good morning, Ambassador Martinez," Kethvar replied. "I was just reading about your Great Reclamation Project. Quite an undertaking." Sarah nodded. "Yes, it's time for humanity to focus inward for a while. We've spread ourselves thin across too many worlds. Our people want to be closer to home, but you're abandoning some very valuable territories," Kethvar said. "The mining colonies in the Vega sector alone produce millions of tons of rare metals each year." Sarah shrugged. "We have enough for our needs. Let others who want those resources take care of them." Kethvar was puzzled. In all his years in galactic politics, he had never seen a species voluntarily give up valuable territory. There had to be more to this story. But before he could ask more questions, the council session began. Over the following weeks, more reports arrived. Human cargo ships were arriving at colonies throughout their territory. But instead of bringing supplies and new colonists, they were taking everything away. Entire populations packed up and left. Mining equipment was dismantled. Research stations were carefully taken apart. The humans were not just leaving these worlds empty. They were making sure nothing valuable was left behind. Every piece of technology, every scientific instrument, every useful material was loaded onto their ships and taken away. Other species watched with interest. The Zalani Empire sent scouts to observe several human colonies during their evacuation. The reports were strange. The humans worked with incredible efficiency. They had clearly planned this operation for years. Nothing was rushed, nothing was forgotten, nothing was wasted. "It's like they're erasing themselves from these worlds," reported General Thaxon to the Zalani High Command. "But they're being very careful about it. They're not destroying anything. They're just taking everything with them." The Krex Dominion saw opportunity. Admiral Vorthak proposed claiming several former human territories. "If they're too weak to hold these worlds, we'll take them," he growled to his officers. But when Krex ships arrived at the abandoned colonies, they found empty worlds that had been stripped completely clean. The humans had even removed the power generators and communication arrays. There was nothing left but empty buildings and bare ground. The ethereal collective was more curious than greedy. Dr. Yilan studied the evacuation patterns from her laboratory ship. "There's something odd about this," she told her research team. "The humans aren't just moving randomly. They're following a very specific plan, but I can't figure out what they're planning." The merchant republics tried to profit from the situation. They offered to buy goods from human colonies before they were evacuated. They offered transport services for human families who wanted to leave quickly. They offered to manage the abandoned territories for the humans. Every offer was politely declined. The humans had their own ships. They had their own plans. They didn't seem to need help from anyone. Month by month, the human presence in the galaxy shrank. 400 worlds were evacuated in the first year. Space stations were dismantled and moved. Trade posts were closed. Diplomatic offices were relocated to human embassy ships that traveled between the remaining human systems. The galaxy barely noticed. The Zalani Empire expanded into some former human territory. The Krex Dominion claimed mining rights on abandoned worlds. The Trade Federation established new routes that bypassed human space entirely. Ambassador Martinez continued to attend council sessions, but she seemed different, more distant. She spoke less often, and when she did speak, her words were carefully chosen. She still smiled and was polite to everyone, but something had changed. "We're entering a period of internal focus," she explained when asked about humanity's future plans. "We have much work to do in our home systems. We'll maintain diplomatic relations, of course, but our priorities are changing." Kethvar tried to learn more about these changing priorities. He invited Sarah to private dinners. He asked casual questions about human culture and technology. He even visited Earth once, taking a diplomatic tour of the human homeworld. Everything seemed normal on Earth. Cities buzzed with activity. Humans went about their daily lives. Children played in parks. Artists created beautiful works. Scientists worked in laboratories. But Kethvar noticed that many of the brightest minds seemed to be working on projects he didn't recognize. When he asked about these projects, he received polite but vague answers. "Oh, we're exploring new approaches to energy production," one scientist said. "We're investigating some interesting theories about space and time," said another. "We're working on better ways to organize information," explained a third. None of it seemed particularly threatening or impressive. Just humans doing what humans always did, quietly working on their own projects while the rest of the galaxy focused on bigger, more important things. By the end of the second year, humanity had withdrawn from over 400 worlds. Their territory had shrunk to just 50 systems clustered around Earth and their oldest colonies. Long-range sensors detected increased activity in human space, but when asked, Ambassador Martinez simply said they were building for the future. The galaxy moved on. There were wars to fight, trade deals to negotiate, territories to claim. The human withdrawal became old news, barely worth mentioning in the daily reports. But in the quiet corners of human space, something unprecedented was beginning. While the great powers of the galaxy fought over scraps of territory and resources, humanity had started asking different questions. What if they didn't need to compete? What if they could change the rules entirely? What if the universe itself could be convinced to work with them instead of against them? The exodus was complete, but the real work was just beginning, and the galaxy, busy with its own affairs, would not notice what humanity was becoming until it was far too late to do anything but watch in amazement and regret. 5 years had passed since the last human cargo ship left the Kepler colonies. The galaxy had grown used to the empty spaces where human settlements once stood. Trade routes adjusted. Border maps were redrawn. Life continued as it always had, but slowly, quietly, things began to go wrong. Captain Zorix of the Merchant Republic freighter Star Prophet was the first to notice real problems. His cargo route through the Outer Rim had always been safe, protected by human patrol ships and early warning stations. Now those stations were gone and pirates had moved in quickly. "Third attack this month," Zorix reported to his company's headquarters after limping into port with half his cargo stolen. The human peacekeepers used to keep these shipping lanes clean. Without them, it's becoming too dangerous to travel. Similar reports came from across the galaxy. The humans had never been the strongest military force, but they had provided security in hundreds of small ways. Patrol ships that scared off pirates, early warning systems that detected raiders, diplomatic missions that convinced hostile groups to find peaceful solutions. Without these services, old conflicts began to flare up again. Dr. Yilan of the Ethereal, Collective first documented the pattern while analyzing galactic stability reports in her research station orbiting the academic world of Logos Prime. Her tentacles moved quickly across holographic displays as she compiled data from the past. 5 years. "This is fascinating," she murmured to her assistant, a young ethereal named Crix. "Look at these numbers. Piracy incidents have increased by 37%. Trade disputes have doubled. Minor wars have tripled." Crix examined the data with his large, luminous eyes. "But surely this is just normal fluctuation. The galaxy has always had conflicts." "No," Dr. Yolande said, her voice filled with wonder and concern. "These are all conflicts that humans use to help resolve. I never realized how much they did until they stopped doing it." She pulled up more detailed records. The asteroid belt. Mining dispute, which had raged for decades until human mediators found a solution that satisfied everyone. It had erupted again last year, more violent than ever. The Synthesis Rebellion, a religious conflict that humans had helped settle through patient negotiation. Now 3 systems were at war over the same issues. "They weren't our strongest allies," Dr. Yilan admitted. "They weren't our smartest advisors. But they had this way of finding solutions that no one else had thought of. They made problems go away without anyone really noticing how." The pattern appeared everywhere once she knew what to look for. Innovation rates had dropped across the galaxy. The humans had never led major research projects, but they had contributed small ideas that often proved crucial. A new way to organize data that made calculations faster, a simple design change that made engines more efficient, creative solutions to problems that had stumped other species for years. It's like they were the oil that kept the galactic machine running smoothly, Dr. Yilan explained to her research team. "No one noticed the oil until it was gone, and now everything is starting to grind and squeak." General Thaxon of the Zalani Empire was having his own problems. The Outer Rim Wars had restarted with a vengeance. 3 different species were fighting over territory that had been peaceful for decades. "What happened to the peace accord of Rigel?" he demanded of his intelligence officers during a strategy meeting in the war room of the fortress world Zalani Prime. "The accord fell apart 2 years ago," reported Colonel Vex, his scales shimmering nervously. "The humans were guarantors of the treaty. When they withdrew from the region, the local species decided the agreement was no longer valid." Thaxon slammed his clawed hand on the metal table. "The humans weren't even strong enough to enforce that treaty. How could their absence matter so much?" "They didn't enforce it through strength," Colonel Vex explained carefully. "They enforced it through trust. All the local species believed the humans would find fair solutions to any problems. Without that trust, they're settling disputes with weapons instead of words." Similar conversations were happening in government centers across the galaxy. The Krex Dominion was dealing with slave revolts on worlds they had conquered from humans. The slaves had been peaceful under human rule, but now they fought constantly against their new Krex masters. "The humans never used fear to control these populations," Admiral Vorthak growled to his subordinates. "How did they keep order without intimidation?" His intelligence chief, a scarred veteran named Grimfang, had studied human administrative records. "They used something called hope, Admiral. The humans convinced subject populations that cooperation would lead to better lives for everyone. The slaves actually believed their situation would improve over time." "Ridiculous," Vorthak snorted. "Hope is not a strategy." "Perhaps not, Admiral, but it was effective. The slaves worked harder for hope than they do for fear." Meanwhile, long-range sensors were detecting unusual activity in human space. The humans had been quiet for 5 years, but now energy readings from their systems were off the charts. Massive construction projects were underway, but no one could determine what was being built. The human embassy ships still traveled between species capitals, but they had become even more mysterious. Ambassador Martinez and her colleagues were polite and professional, but they revealed nothing about what humanity was doing in their home systems. "We're pursuing some interesting research projects," was all Martinez would say when pressed for details. "Internal development initiatives that require our full attention." Kethavar had tried many times to get more information. He invited Sarah to dinners, cultural events, and private meetings. She always accepted graciously, but she revealed nothing important. "Your people have been very quiet lately," he said during one such dinner in his embassy on Nexus Prime. The galaxy misses your contributions to various projects. Sarah smiled that same kind smile she had always worn. We appreciate the sentiment, Ambassador, but humanity is entering a new phase of development. We need time to explore possibilities we've never considered before. What kind of possibilities? The kind that require thinking differently about everything, Sarah replied. We're learning to ask questions we never knew we should ask. Kethvar found this answer both intriguing and frustrating. What questions could humans ask that other, more advanced species hadn't already considered? What were they developing that required such secrecy? The ethereal collective tried to penetrate human space with long-range scanners and spy probes. They found sophisticated sensor networks that detected every approach. Not weapons systems exactly, but something that made their probes malfunction, or simply disappear. It's not hostile, Dr. Yilan reported to the Collective Council. Our probes aren't being destroyed. They're just redirected somehow, encouraged to go somewhere else. We can't get close enough to see what the humans are building. The Krex Dominion tried a more direct approach. They sent military scouts to the edges of human territory. These ships encountered strange effects that their science officers couldn't explain. Space itself seemed to bend around human systems, making them difficult to approach or even locate precisely. It's like they're hiding behind some kind of dimensional fold, reported Captain Scar after his scout ship was gently but firmly turned away from a human system. I can't explain it better than that. We were heading toward their sun, and suddenly we were heading away from it. No force, no acceleration, no discomfort. We just weren't going there anymore. The galaxy's most powerful civilizations found themselves facing a puzzling situation. The weakest member species had withdrawn from galactic affairs and were now doing something that seemed to defy understanding. But since humans had never been a threat before, most species classified it as an interesting curiosity rather than a serious concern. Let them play with their mysterious projects, laughed Admiral Vorthak during a joint military conference. While they're hiding in their home systems building whatever toys amuse them, we're expanding our empires across the galaxy. They'll emerge eventually, and when they do, they'll find that the galaxy has moved on without them. But some individuals were beginning to worry. Dr. Yilan continued her research, documenting the growing problems caused by humanity's absence. General Thaxon found himself missing the reliable human peacekeepers who had made his job so much easier. Even Kethavar wondered what Sarah Martinez and her people were really doing in their hidden systems. The humans had left quietly, but their silence was becoming louder than any words they had ever spoken. The galaxy was learning, slowly and painfully, that the unremarkable species had been far more important than anyone had realized. And in the depths of human space, protected by technologies that made detection impossible, humanity was becoming something that would change the rules of existence itself. The emergency alarm echoed through the council chambers on Nexus Prime at 0347 Galactic Standard Time. Kethavar was dragged from deep sleep in his embassy quarters, his forearms fumbling for his communication device as red warning lights flashed outside his window. All council members to emergency session immediately, came the urgent broadcast. Priority 1 crisis. All species representatives required. Within an hour, the great chamber was filled with confused and worried delegates. The massive holographic display in the center showed a map of the galaxy, but something was terribly wrong. Entire systems along the outer rim were marked in black. Gone. Silent. Admiral Korvash of the Krex Dominion spoke first, his deep voice filled with barely controlled fear. The Devourer swarm has returned. A cold silence fell over the chamber. Every species knew the legends of the Devourers, the synthetic plague that had nearly destroyed all organic life 3,000 years ago. Ancient records described machines that consumed entire star systems, growing stronger with each world they devoured. How many systems? Asked Dr. Yilan, her voice barely above a whisper. 17 confirmed lost, Admiral Korvash replied. 23 more have gone silent in the past 6 hours. The swarm is moving faster than our projections indicated was possible. The display updated in real time, showing new black zones, spreading like infection across the galactic map. The Devourers moved in multiple directions at once, consuming everything in their path. Planets, moons, asteroid belts, space stations, everything was reduced to component materials and fed into the growing swarm. How long before they reach the core worlds? President Malik of the Trade Federation asked, his normally steady voice shaking. At current rate of expansion, 6 months, came the reply from the collective's chief scientist. Less if they continue. To accelerate. Panic erupted in the chamber. Representatives shouted in dozens of languages. Some species began making frantic calls to their home worlds, ordering immediate evacuations. Others demanded military action. General Thaxon stood and raised his voice above the chaos. We must combine all our fleets, every ship, every weapon, every soldier. This threatens all organic life. Agreed, growled Admiral Vorthak of the Krex, Dominion. For once, we have a common enemy. Politics must wait. The next several hours were spent in desperate planning. Military commanders presented battle strategies. Scientists discussed possible weaknesses in the Devourer technology. Diplomats negotiated rapid alliance agreements between species that had been enemies just days before. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. The combined fleets of the galaxy had barely managed to stop the Devourers 3 millennia ago, and that was when they were much smaller and less advanced. Now, they returned with technologies refined by thousands of years of evolution. We should contact everyone, Kethvar suggested during a brief break in the planning. Every species, every colony, every research station. We need every possible resource. Including the humans? Asked Ambassador Torres of the Merchant Republics. The chamber fell quiet. In all the panic and planning, no one had thought to include humanity in their desperate alliance. They had been absent from galactic affairs for 15 years. Most species had almost forgotten they existed. Do they even have a military anymore? Wondered President Malik aloud. They withdrew all their ships when they consolidated their territory. Dr. Yelan accessed the most recent intelligence reports on humanity. Long-range sensors still detect activity in human space, but we don't know what kind. They haven't built any traditional warships that we can identify. It's worth asking, General Thaxon decided. At this point, we need every ally we can get. The message was sent to the human embassy ship New Horizon, currently stationed in the neutral zone near the Rigel system. The response came 12 hours later during another emergency session as 6 more systems fell to the Devourers. The holographic display flickered and resolved into the image of a human woman. But this wasn't Ambassador Martinez. This person was younger, wearing what appeared to be a military uniform unlike any design the galaxy had seen before. I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Corps, she said, her voice calm despite the crisis consuming the galaxy. We are aware of the situation with the synthetic plague you call the Devourer Swarm. Admiral, Kethvar said quickly, we need every available ship and weapon. This threatens all organic life in the galaxy. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. We understand the severity of the threat. Humanity will consider appropriate action. Consider? Ambassador Torres burst out. There's nothing to consider. These things will kill everyone. We require certain assurances first, Admiral Chen replied, unmoved by the outburst. Humanity's territorial sovereignty must be respected in any post-crisis settlement. Additionally, human representatives must have a voice in galactic governance, proportional to our contribution to resolving this crisis. The demand seemed reasonable, even modest. After 15 years of isolation, humanity was simply asking for respect and fair treatment in exchange for their help. Agreed, said General Thaxon immediately. Whatever you can contribute will be valued and rewarded. Admiral Chen smiled slightly. Very well. Human forces will engage the Devourer swarm within 72 hours. Please coordinate with our ships to avoid interference. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in confused silence. Human forces? What forces? Intelligence reports suggested humanity had no significant military capability. Their questions were answered sooner than expected. Within 48 hours, reports began flooding in from the front lines. Ships were appearing at Devourer incursion sites, but these vessels bore no resemblance to any known human design. Captain Vex of the Zalani Border Guard was the first to witness the new human ships in action. His patrol squadron had been fleeing from a Devourer attack group when the strangest vessels he had ever seen appeared between them and certain death. They moved like living things, he reported later, his voice filled with awe. not like ships at all, but like creatures swimming through space. They were beautiful and terrible at the same time. The human ships were impossible to describe adequately. They seemed to exist partially outside normal space, phasing in and out of visibility. Their hulls shifted color and shape constantly, as if the vessels were adapting to their environment in real time. But it was their weapons that defied all understanding. They didn't fire energy beams or launch missiles. Instead, the Devourers simply stopped existing wherever the human ships focused their attention. Not destroyed, not disabled, they just ceased to be, as if reality itself had decided they were no longer welcome. It was like watching gods at work, Captain Vex continued. The Devourers that had been consuming everything in their path just weren't there anymore. Empty space where the swarm had been moments before. Similar reports came from across the battlefield. Human ships appeared at every major Devourer incursion, and wherever they went, the synthetic plague simply ended. Not defeated in battle, but negated at some fundamental level. The galactic military commanders were stunned. Admiral Vorthak watched tactical displays in disbelief as Devourer swarms that had been advancing for weeks suddenly vanished from sensors. How are they doing this? He demanded of his science officers. What kind of weapons can simply erase targets from existence? We don't know, Admiral, came the helpless reply. Our sensors can't even properly detect the human ships, much less analyze their capabilities. Dr. Yilan was frantically analyzing every scrap of data from the battles. The readings made no sense according to known physics. The human vessels seemed to operate according to principles that shouldn't be possible. They're not just using advanced technology, she explained to her research team. They're using something that isn't technology at all, at least not as we understand it. It's like they've convinced the universe to work differently for them. Within 6 months, the Devourer threat was completely neutralized. The synthetic plague that had seemed unstoppable was gone, existing nowhere in the galaxy. Human ships had systematically visited every infected system and simply made the Devourers stop being real. The galaxy celebrated, but the celebration was mixed with a growing sense of unease. The species that had been dismissed as weak and unremarkable for centuries had just demonstrated power beyond anything in recorded history. Admiral Chen appeared before the Galactic Council one final time as the crisis officially ended. Her image was clearer now, transmitted from what appeared to be a ship of incredible size and complexity. The immediate threat has been resolved, she announced. Humanity will honor the agreements made during this crisis. We look forward to productive discussions about the future of galactic civilization. The transmission ended, leaving the assembled delegates with 1,000 questions and the uncomfortable realization that everything they thought they knew about humanity had been completely wrong. In their moment of greatest need, the galaxy had discovered that the quiet species they had ignored had become something unprecedented. The question now was what humanity would do with power that seemed to have no limits. The post-crisis negotiations took place on a neutral space station that had been hastily constructed in the no-man's land between major power blocks. Representatives from every species in the galaxy gathered to discuss the new reality that humanity had created by defeating the Devourers so completely. But when the human delegation arrived, the gathered diplomats realized that everything had changed far more than they had imagined. The human ship approached the station like nothing they had ever seen. It seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, its form shifting and flowing as if it were made of living starlight. The vessel docked without using any visible docking mechanisms. It simply merged with the station as if both structures had always been designed to fit together perfectly. Admiral Sarah Chen emerged from what appeared to be a door that opened in empty air. She walked across the docking bay wearing a uniform that seemed to be woven from captured aurora, its fabric shifting through colors that had no names in any galactic language. Behind her came a small team of humans who looked both familiar and impossibly different. They moved with a grace that suggested they were no longer bound by the same physical limitations as other species. Their eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. Kethvar greeted the human delegation in the station's main conference room, trying to hide his nervousness behind diplomatic protocol. Admiral Chen, welcome. We're grateful for humanity's intervention in the crisis. Thank you, Ambassador. Admiral Chen replied with a warm smile that somehow made everyone in the room feel both comforted and slightly afraid. "We're pleased we could help resolve the situation." General Thaxton leaned forward in his chair. "Your ships, Admiral, they operated using principles we don't recognize. What kind of technology did humanity develop during your isolation?" Admiral Chen exchanged glances with her companions. "We prefer to call it applied metaphysics rather than technology. During our withdrawal from galactic affairs, we realized that we had been thinking far too small about what was possible." Dr. Yilan's tentacles writhed with excitement. "Applied metaphysics? What does that mean?" "It means we stopped accepting the limitations that other species consider unchangeable," explained Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human scientist who sat beside Admiral Chen. "While the galaxy competed for resources and territory, we asked different questions. What if scarcity is a choice? What if distance is an illusion? What if the laws of physics are actually suggestions that can be negotiated with?" The assembled delegates stared in confusion. President Malik of the Trade Federation spoke first. "Negotiate with the laws of physics? That's impossible." "We thought so too," admitted Admiral Chen, "but we discovered that the universe is not a machine to be exploited. It's more like a canvas to be rewritten or a conversation partner to be convinced. Reality is far more flexible than anyone imagined." To demonstrate her point, Admiral Chen held up her hand. In her palm, a small star began to form from nothing. Not a hologram or an energy projection, but an actual star, a tiny ball of nuclear fusion that provided light and warmth to the entire conference room. "Matter and energy are just different expressions of consciousness interacting with possibility," she explained casually as delegates gasped and pointed at the impossible star. "Once you understand that relationship, you can ask reality to rearrange itself in more cooperative ways." The star in her palm pulsed once and became a flower. The flower bloomed and released seeds that floated through the air, taking root in the metal walls of the station and growing into a small garden that filled the room with the scent of spring. "This is madness," whispered Admiral Vorthak. "Physics doesn't work that way." Dr. Vasquez smiled gently. "Physics works however reality agrees to let it work. The mistake every species has made is assuming that the current rules are permanent and unchangeable. We learned to collaborate with the universe instead of fighting against it." She gestured toward the walls of the conference room, and they became transparent, revealing the swirling beauty of the nebula outside the station. Then she gestured again, and the walls returned to normal. "During our 15 years of isolation, humanity evolved beyond the need for traditional resources," Admiral Chen continued. "We don't mine asteroids for metal anymore, because we can convince empty space to become metal. We don't need to travel through hyperspace because we can persuade distance to become irrelevant." Kethavar struggled to process what he was hearing. "But how? How did you discover these abilities?" "By changing how we thought about thinking itself," replied Dr. James Wright, another member of the human delegation. "Every species in the galaxy has been limited by the assumption that consciousness is separate from reality. Humans learned to merge the two concepts." To illustrate his point, Dr. Wright closed his eyes and concentrated. The conference table began to change, its surface flowing like liquid metal until it displayed a perfect three-dimensional map of the galaxy. But this wasn't just a projection. The table had actually become the map, complete with tiny spinning, worlds, and miniature suns. "We call this process reality sculpting," he explained. "Consciousness shapes possibility, and possibility becomes actuality when properly focused. The key insight was realizing that the boundary between mind and matter is artificial." The assembled delegates sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Humanity had not just developed advanced technology, they had transcended the fundamental limitations that defined existence for every other species. Dr. Yilan found her voice first. "The energy requirements for these transformations must be enormous. Where do you get the power?" Admiral Chen laughed, a sound like silver bells in a gentle wind. "Energy is another illusion, Doctor. When you can convince the universe that something should exist, it provides its own power to make that happen. Conservation of energy is just a rule that reality follows when no one asks it to do otherwise." "But there must be limits," insisted General Thaxton. "No species can have unlimited power." "You're right," Admiral Chen agreed. There are limits. The limits are imposed by imagination, wisdom, and ethics. The universe is willing to reshape itself according to consciousness, but consciousness must be responsible for the consequences. She gestured, and the conference room filled with images of human space. Cities that existed partially in normal dimensions and partially in realms of pure thought. Worlds where the landscape changed according to the collective dreams of their inhabitants. Ships that traveled by convincing space-time that their destination was actually their current location. This is why we withdrew from galactic civilization, Admiral Chen explained. We needed time and space to become what we truly could be, without the limitations imposed by competing within traditional paradigms. Ambassador Torres of the Merchant Republics was shaking his head in disbelief. If you had these abilities, why didn't you use them before? Why let the galaxy struggle with conflicts and problems you could have solved? Because we didn't have these abilities before, Admiral Chen replied patiently. We developed them during our isolation, and because some things can only be learned in solitude and silence. The noise and competition of galactic politics would have prevented us from hearing the universe when it tried to teach us new ways of being. The human delegation spent the next several hours demonstrating abilities that redefined what was possible. They created temporary pocket dimensions for private conversations. They showed how time could be stretched or compressed in small areas. They demonstrated communication methods that operated faster than light by bypassing space entirely. But perhaps the most shocking revelation was humanity's new perspective on galactic civilization itself. We don't want to rule the galaxy, Admiral Chen explained as the demonstrations concluded. We've evolved beyond the need for dominion or control. Competition for limited resources becomes irrelevant when resources can be created from consciousness itself. Then what do you want? Asked Kethvar. Admiral Chen smiled that warm, slightly frightening smile again. We want to offer you a choice. You can continue playing the game as you always have, fighting over finite resources, measuring success by what you take from others, expanding through conquest and competition. Or you can join us in exploring what becomes possible when you stop seeing the universe as something to be conquered and start seeing it as something to be collaborated with. The conference room fell silent as the delegates contemplated this offer. The species that had dismissed humanity as unremarkable now faced a civilization that had quietly become godlike, while the rest of the galaxy fought over scraps. The most unsettling aspect of the human transformation was their attitude. They bore no grudges, showed no desire for revenge, displayed no hunger for power or control. They had simply evolved beyond the paradigms that drove galactic civilization, and now they were offering to help others make the same journey. The question facing every species was whether they had the courage to abandon everything they thought they knew about existence itself. How do we know this isn't some elaborate trick? Admiral Vorthak demanded, his warrior instincts refusing to accept what he had witnessed. How do we know you won't use these abilities to dominate us? Dr. Vasquez answered by creating a small sphere of pure light in her hands. 3 months after the revelation at the neutral station, the galaxy was struggling to adapt to a reality that no longer followed the rules everyone had accepted for millions of years. The first species to embrace humanity's offer were the ethereal, collective. Dr. Yilan had convinced her people that their pursuit of knowledge required them to explore these new possibilities, regardless of the risks. We have always sought to understand the universe, she explained to her research council on Logos Prime. Now we have the opportunity to participate in creating it. How can we refuse such a chance? The transformation of the ethereal collective began slowly, with meditation practices that taught consciousness to commune directly with reality. Their scientists learned to conduct experiments by asking questions directly to the universe and receiving answers in the form of spontaneous new phenomena. Within weeks, ethereal researchers were creating new forms of matter that had never existed before. They developed techniques for storing knowledge in crystallized thought and for sharing memories directly between minds, separated by vast distances. It's not magic, Dr. Yilan explained in her reports to other species. It's a deeper understanding of what was always possible. We simply learned to participate in the conversation between mind and matter that has been happening since the beginning of time. The Trade Federation also adapted quickly, though for different reasons. President Malik realized that traditional, Economics became meaningless when resources could be created from pure consciousness. Instead of fighting this change, his people embraced it. If scarcity is no longer real, then wealth must be redefined, he announced to the Federation Council. We will become traders in possibilities rather than materials, merchants of experiences rather than objects. The Federation established the first reality markets, where consciousness-crafted experiences and impossible objects were exchanged. They developed new forms of currency based on the beauty and creativity of the things people could imagine into existence. But not all species welcomed the transformation. The Krex Dominion, led by Admiral Vorthak, viewed humanity's evolution as a threat to everything they valued. Their entire culture was built around conquest, dominance, and the worship of military strength. In a universe where power could be redefined by thought, their traditional advantages meant nothing. We will not bow to these reality warpers, Vorthak declared during an emergency meeting of the Krex High Command. If they think their magic tricks make them superior to Krex warriors, they will learn otherwise. The Dominion began planning a massive military assault on human space. They assembled the largest fleet in their history, armed with every weapon in their arsenal. If humanity wanted to change the rules of existence, the Krex would remind them that some rules were enforced by force. The attack came without warning. 1,000 Krex warships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, weapons, charged and ready for battle. Admiral Vorthak himself led the fleet from his flagship, the Iron Claw, a massive dreadnought bristling with enough firepower to crack planets. Humans, his voice boomed across all communication frequencies. Your attempt to remake the galaxy ends now. Surrender your reality-shaping abilities to the Krex Dominion, or we will take them by force. The response came from Admiral Chen, her image appearing on every screen in the Krex fleet. She stood on what appeared to be the bridge of a ship, but the background was a swirling vista of stars and nebulae that seemed to exist in constant motion. Admiral Vorthak, she said with genuine sadness in her voice. Violence is no longer necessary. The universe has enough room for all of us to exist as we choose to exist. Spare me your philosophy, Vorthak snarled. We choose to exist as conquerors, and we choose to conquer you. He gave the order to attack. 1,000 ships opened fire simultaneously, unleashing enough destructive energy to sterilize entire solar systems. But the weapons simply stopped working. Not destroyed, not blocked, not deflected. The energy beams and missiles just ceased to exist the moment they were fired. Krex warriors frantically pressed triggers and pushed buttons, but nothing happened. Their weapons had become as harmless as toys. How? Vorthak demanded, his voice cracking with confusion and rage. We asked reality to remember that violence is a choice, not a necessity, Admiral Chen explained patiently. The universe agreed that weapons designed to harm others shouldn't function in spaces dedicated to peace. Vorthak tried to ram his flagship into the nearest human vessel, but found that his ship would no longer respond to aggressive commands. The Iron Claw drifted gently through space, its engines refusing to operate in hostile mode. "This is impossible," he roared. "You cannot simply rewrite the laws of physics." "We didn't rewrite anything," Admiral Chen replied. "We simply reminded the universe of laws that were always true but had been forgotten. Consciousness shapes reality. Love is more powerful than hate. Cooperation achieves more than conflict." Across the Krex fleet, weapons systems shut down permanently, not damaged or disabled, but gently transformed into something else. Missile launchers became hydroponic gardens, energy cannons turned into observation telescopes, armor plating rearranged, itself into comfortable living spaces. The Krex warriors found themselves aboard ships that had been redesigned for exploration and discovery rather than conquest and destruction. Their uniforms changed from military fatigues to comfortable robes suitable for contemplation and learning. "What have you done to us?" Vorthak whispered, staring at his own reflection in what had once been his command screen, but was now a window, showing the beautiful dance of distant galaxies. "We've given you the opportunity to discover who you could become when you're not afraid," Admiral Chen answered. "Your ships will take you to worlds where you can learn new ways of being. Your Weapons have become tools for creating beauty instead of spreading destruction. Your strength can now be used to build instead of tear down. The former Krex fleet departed Sol system peacefully, their crews beginning a journey of transformation that would take them far from everything they had known, but bring them closer to everything they could become. Word of the Krex encounter spread rapidly throughout the galaxy. Species that had been considering resistance to the New Order reconsidered their positions. If humanity could neutralize the galaxy's most powerful military force without violence, what hope did opposition have? But humanity's response to aggression also demonstrated something else. They had evolved beyond the need for revenge or punishment. They could have destroyed the Krex fleet or enslaved its crews. Instead, they had offered transformation and growth. Kethvar watched these developments from his embassy on Nexus Prime, trying to decide what the Zalani Empire should do. His people valued honor and tradition, but they also valued survival and adaptation. Perhaps, he told his staff during one of their daily briefings, the greatest honor lies in having the courage to become something greater than what we are. The Zalani Empire became the third major power to formally request guidance in developing consciousness-reality collaboration techniques. Their warrior traditions evolved into disciplines focused on protecting and nurturing growth rather than conquest and domination. Over the following years, the galaxy transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Species that chose to embrace the new paradigm developed abilities and perspectives that made their previous existence seem like a dim shadow of what was possible. Worlds were reshaped according to the dreams of their inhabitants. Space itself became more cooperative, allowing faster-than-light travel through methods that resembled prayer more than engineering. Diseases and aging became optional conditions that could be negotiated with rather than inevitable fates to be endured. Art flourished as artists learned to create with pure consciousness. Scientists made discoveries by having conversations with the phenomena they studied. Engineers built structures that existed partially in imagination and partially in physical reality. But some species chose to remain unchanged. They continued to follow the old ways, mining asteroids for resources, fighting over territory, measuring success by accumulation and dominance. The universe accommodated their choice, creating pocket regions where the traditional rules still applied. These species lived like museum exhibits in a galaxy that had moved beyond their understanding. They were not persecuted or oppressed, but they were increasingly irrelevant to the great work of consciousness and reality learning to dance together. Humanity, meanwhile, continued to evolve. They established academies where other species could learn reality-shaping techniques. They created diplomatic protocols for resolving conflicts through collaborative imagination. They developed new forms of art that existed in dimensions that had no names, but they also remained recognizably human. They still laughed at jokes, cried at beautiful music, and gathered with friends to share stories. Their enhanced abilities had not replaced their humanity, but had revealed what humanity had always been capable of becoming. Admiral Chen, now serving as humanity's primary ambassador to the transformed galaxy, often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "We didn't set out to change everything," she explained to a gathering of species representatives 5 years after the Krex incident.